Hi, Eddie.
Hey, Anissa. How you doing?
Great. How are you? I don't know where my I don't see Lydia or my panelists. Carrie, if you're listening, we've got people that are doing a presentation.
Hi, Counselor. It's Candace. Carrie's on vacation.
Oh, hi, Candace. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You let Danielle Ferreira in and Kate Barand in?
Yes, I have all your panelists waiting. I was
Okay,
just waiting for
perfect.
you to come in. Do you want me to let everyone in now?
Yeah, you can let them in. That's great.
Okay, and I'm going to stop the screen share that I have going on now.
Okay.
Hi, Candace.
Hi, Counselor. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Doing good. Doing good.
Good.
Counselor Sabi George, is it okay for everyone to come over at this point?
I'm okay with that. Yeah, because I know we have Danielle, Larry, Kate, Christy. I think I said Danielle. I'll look at that guest list. I mean, they can all come in. They're all partners in this work. I don't think any of them are going to Zoom bomb us.
I don't know.
We're
Christine
all a bunch of troublemakers.
I was gonna say, with this group, you never know.
might do that.
Yeah. Hi, Dominique.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Sheila. Hi, Larry. Hi, Mosick.
Mosick, I haven't seen you in a while.
Hello.
Counselor, I don't have Ethan Wong on my list.
Neither do I. He's not on my list.
He's a member of the Family Aid staff who's getting information for us.
Do we want him on camera or is he fine in the guest list? I mean, is he
He's
fine?
Fine on the guest list. Yep. Thank you.
If he's in the waiting room, he won't be able to hear the hearing. He has to watch it on the City of Boston website.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.
I'm just gonna wait. Oh, hi, Felicia. I'm just waiting for Chair Edwards to join us, and we'll get started. She'll be here in 3 minutes, Counselor Edwards.
Great.
Before we get started, I know Counselor Edwards looks like she's about to log in. I'm to you guys on the call. I'm just super excited we're at this point. I can't believe we're here.
Great.
And then Candace, I see Counselor Bach up. There she is.
Hi, Counselor Sabi George.
Hello, Counselor Bach. Hi, Courtney. I love seeing some of my most favorite people all together.
Counselor, whenever Counselor Edwards arrives, we are live streaming and recording, so we'll be all set to go.
Beautiful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Candace, Counselor Flaherty is in the waiting room.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome, Michael. Sometimes I don't know whether you do that on purpose, the delayed voice. The little things that we think about to get through some of these meetings. Is he hesitating on purpose?
Must be the Zoom, must be a bad connection.
Let's hope that you can hear us better.
Perfect, Kate. Hello, Madam Chair.
Hi, my apologies to all for being delayed. Just was getting the final order and we will start right away. I have in attendance the sponsor, Counselor Sabi George. I have Counselor Ed Flynn, Counselor Julia Mejia, and Counselor Bach and Counselor Flaherty. Is that everyone?
Yes.
Okay, then. So considering I'm running a little bit late, and I again apologize to everyone. I assume all the panelists are here?
Yep.
Very well. So I'm going to do an introduction and then I will turn it over to the lead sponsor, or allow for everyone to say some brief introductions, and then I will turn it over to the lead sponsor. Excuse me. All right, everyone. Formally starting today's hearing on family homelessness on docket 0225. This is the Committee on Government Operations. And today is September 14th. It is 4 p.m. And this is about an ordinance to create a special commission on ending family homelessness. It's sponsored by Councillor Sabi George. We are having this in government ops today because it's a specific ordinance that is required to pass the city council, then ultimately would need to be signed by the mayor as well. So together we would have to create this commission. In accordance with Governor Baker's executive order, and in order to balance safety and to assure that we are also able to conduct our business, we are having this hearing on Zoom. You can watch this hearing via live stream at boston.gov/city-council-tv, or it will be later broadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. For public testimony, you can send written testimony to ccc.go@boston.gov. Again, this commission would establish this ordinance would establish a commission to develop an actionable and measurable plan to end family homelessness in the city of Boston. The ordinance provides for the membership of the commission and identifies the authorities and responsibilities of the commission. Members of the commissions will serve without compensation. And we have Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing for the City of Boston and Director of DND, is with us today from the administration, along with Courtney Trudell and Dominic Williams from the Department of DND. We also have Danielle Ferrier, CEO of Heading Home, Larry Simmons, President of Family Aid Boston, Christy Staples, Vice President of Mind the Gap United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley, Kate Barad, President and CEO of Horizons for Homeless Children, Felicia Smith, Executive Director, Sojourner House, I believe Mosick, Jacobian also is coming or will be here for Higher Ground Boston, and Christine Dixon, Executive Director of Project Hope. I am now going to turn it over for any of my colleagues to have some very brief opening remarks, and then ultimately we'll turn it over to the lead sponsor. In order of arrival, first the lead sponsor is Anissa Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll actually make extended comments if that's okay, introducing the panel, and then comments from colleagues, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
Very well.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. This afternoon's hearing will cover the ordinance I originally filed last year to create a special commission to end family homelessness in the city of Boston. The idea for this commission emerged from my family shelter provider roundtable. Almost 5 years ago, or about 4.5 years ago, I created this roundtable as a part of my work as chair of the then newly created Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery. I created this because we knew that we had far too many homeless individuals and families for a city as resource rich as ours. From being a teacher, I knew that we had homeless students in the Boston Public Schools, but it was through the work of the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery that we discovered there were thousands of homeless Boston Public School students. We now know that there are approximately 5,000 students experiencing homelessness in BPS. That number is 5,000. We have had so many homeless students and families because for decades, the issue of family homelessness has been ignored. To the public, it doesn't look the same as homeless individuals on the street. There are far fewer resources available statewide to support families experiencing homelessness, and not enough resources to move them into stable housing or to prevent them from becoming unhoused in the first place. This disparity between resources available to homeless individuals and homeless families is due to decades of policy choices that this commission will hopefully rectify. Today, you'll hear from several individuals who are working on the ground every day to provide resources to our most vulnerable families who have been through too much. These individuals have been active participants in the roundtable and have shaped my office policy agenda to tackle homelessness. In our first panel, you'll hear from Christy Staples, Vice President of Mind the Gap at the United Way, Danielle Ferrer, CEO of Heading Home, Larry Siemens, President of Family Aid Boston, and Kate Barand, President and CEO of Horizons for Homeless Children. Christy has over 15 years experience in health and housing policy, including previously being at the Corporation for Supportive Housing, CSH, and serving as on the Mass Equity Task Force. Christie has been a strong and clear advocate for every level of government to be working together in real partnership with providers on the ground and families themselves to create programs that get to the root causes of homelessness. Danielle has more than 25 years of experience in the human services industry, including 15 years as a practicing clinical therapist. Her training and primary practice is with high-risk children, youth, and families with a clinical specialty in trauma and attachment. Danielle is always quick to remind us of the traumatic impact of being homeless on a child, that if a family is homeless, then we are actively creating another generation of homeless individuals and families. Larry has more than 35 years experience, including working at Pine Street Inn. Family Aid is the longest serving family shelter provider in Greater Boston and the city's partner with the Leading the Way Home program, a Section 8 voucher initiative which will ultimately move 500 families into stable permanent housing. Larry has launched homelessness prevention programs at Family Aid with BPS and Boston Children's Hospital. These programs have seen 200 children and parents newly enrolled in this program from January to March, and more than 1,200 more since the outbreak of COVID-19 in mid-March. After an extensive career, Kate Barand became CEO of Horizons in 2015. Horizons provides high-quality early education, opportunities for play, and comprehensive family support services. Under Kate's leadership, Horizons will be opening a brand new center in Roxbury designed to support the health and well-being of the city's homeless families by providing on-site early education programs, as well as access to a variety of social services to help parents navigate the many complexities of homelessness. In the second panel, we'll also hear from Mosek Hakobian, Executive Director of Higher Ground Boston, and Christine Dixon, Executive Director of Project Hope. They will speak to the work of the Family-Led Stability Pilot. This pilot program is one that I helped create and is in partnership between the Boston Public Schools, DND, Boston Housing Authority, DSNI, Higher Ground, Project Hope, and a few other partners under the leadership of Mayor Walsh. This pilot works to identify our students who are homeless and are housing insecure in a handful of Boston Public Schools. It is a tremendous effort that Mosek and Christine are spearheading, and we should have this program expanded to every BPS school. They will be followed by Felicia Smith, Executive Director of the Sojourner House. Felicia has been working in the human services field and education for 35 years. Sojourner House was the first family shelter in Boston to house both male and female parents, as well as children of all ages, keeping our homeless families together instead of separating them and destabilizing the family further. It is also one of the few handicap accessible shelters in Massachusetts. While they provide shelter to hundreds of families over the year, they only have on-site capacity for 9 at a time. Under Felicia's leadership since 2016, Sojourner House connects families to community resources and provides workshops on workforce development, parenting classes, and financial literacy so that their families can get back on their feet. Finally, we'll hear from our critical and key partners at D&D, including Chief Dillon, Courtney Trudell, and Dominique Williams. Many D&D staff have been incredible partners in the roundtable, and I am grateful for their continued support and work with us. To my colleagues on the council, these are the experts in the field. They know the families and their struggles. They know the services and the supports our families need to get back on their feet so that homelessness is, at most, a brief and one-time experience for the family. They've been doing this work for decades and have brought their families to the table with us to plan this work and create this commission that we're looking at today. I ask that we give them our attention so that we all deeply understand the scope and intensity of family homelessness in the city of Boston. I know that there will be some text amendments that we will need to make, but I hope we will be ready to move forward and create this special commission soon, and we'll have the full support of the council to do so. We can and we will work to end family homelessness here in the city of Boston. With that, I turn it over to my colleagues for opening statements and then to Christy to lead our first panel. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for sponsoring this ordinance. Thank you, Councilor Asabi George, for sponsoring this, and Councilor Edwards for chairing this important hearing. Having actionable plans that can help us end family homelessness in Boston is something I definitely support. And I think having a special commission where we can come together, coordinate plans, and come up with some ideas is a great way to do that. I will definitely support Councilor Asabi George's plan. Having stable housing is critical to our families and children. And as we continue to face a housing crisis in Boston, and with the ongoing pandemic impacting our economy and employment, we will see more families facing homelessness later on. So it's important that we take steps now to end family homelessness. I'm here to learn more about this and what the special commission will look like. I look forward to the discussion, and I especially want to say thank you to the panelists for all of their work on this important issue for so many years. Thank you, Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mejia.
Councilor Mejia's up. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you to the chair and to the sponsors for calling this hearing. Growing up, sometimes I didn't know what bed, if any, I was going to wake up in, because we bounced around from place to place. And so I understand that this is an issue that is chronic here in the city of Boston and continues to impact so many families. And I think this is an important discussion to have. So when it comes to families, homelessness and housing insecurity, for me, this is not just professional, it's personal. I do have a lot of questions about the current ordinance and look forward to discussing it with my colleagues and the panel of experts that are joining us here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just also want to really extend my thanks to Councilor Asabi George, not just for calling this hearing, but for the many years of work she's done on really on this front and on gathering the many people we're going to hear from today to make sure that, you know, we really need both resources and coordination for our families. I think we all know that coordination isn't enough when the resources to get people housed aren't there. But the lack of coordination can really, it can cause us to miss the opportunities to get people housed and on a different path. So I think it's just so important for us all to be pulled together. And from my work at the Housing Authority previously, I know what a terrible scourge family homelessness is in our Commonwealth every day. And so just really grateful to the maker and glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for chairing and hosting, and also want to thank my colleague, Councilor Asabi George, for putting forth this ordinance that will be discussed today. Great panel of experts. Councilor Asabi George has been a consistent advocate for the needs of homeless families in the city, and her idea behind a commission would be a godsend, I think, for so many of those families. So I'd like to thank her for those efforts. Also, you know, I think often about the city of Boston and talk about our economic strength and how, you know, we're an opportunity-rich and a resource-rich city. But the fact that not only here in Boston and Massachusetts, we have as many homeless families that we do is extremely disheartening. So I understand there's no simple solution to addressing the crisis. And there isn't one grand idea that will solve these problems, but it will require countless hours of dedicated work to find the mix of solutions and support systems to make meaningful change here. And I think that, you know, Councilor Asabi George's idea about the commission in ending family homelessness would have the ability, you know, to put in those hours dedicated solely to meeting this goal. So I wholeheartedly support the creation of this commission, and I'm excited to listen to the experts in the panel today to learn more. But also, just a footnote, as the longest serving counselor, you know, I've seen a lot of commissions created over the years and a lot of them forgotten about. So with very, if any, real accountability. So I just want to make sure that what we're putting forth, given thought to the implementation and the use of whether they're progress reports or benchmarkers or metrics of some sort to make sure that we're giving this commission something to strive for and also something to be held accountable to, because ending homelessness in Boston is a goal that we all strive for. So that's just my 2 cents in my years of experience. So look forward to, again, to the testimony, look forward to supporting this commission, and hopefully we'll have a commission here that will make a huge difference in the lives of so many people. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And unless there are any counselors that joined us in between, I'm going to go ahead and say very quickly some items, discuss the next steps, and then turn it over to explain how we're going to do the hearing, if that's okay, with the lead sponsor.
Please, Chair Edwards, I'd just like to note that Councilor Breeden has.
Councilor Breeden, if you're ready for a quick opening statement.
Very quickly, I apologize, I'm slightly late. Just want to commend Councillor Sabi George for this incredible initiative. I think it's really essential, not only important to provide homes, but also provide support services for many of our families who are struggling with chronic homelessness and persistent challenges. So I'm really looking forward to hear the panel, all of the folks who are going to participate in the panels this afternoon. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I wanted to note the first time I met Councillor Sabi George is when I was at Office of Housing Stability. She brought herself and her entire staff. She said, we heard about you, this new office, and we want to know what you're going to do. So she's been there. That was in 2016. And so I just wanted to note what my colleagues have all said about her dedication, especially with this issue, is pure 100% demonstration that she wants nothing more than to end homelessness and to make sure that people feel welcome and have a place to live in Boston. And I wanted to also note, I'm excited to talk about this. I'm also excited to talk about how this commission is going to not only be dealing with finding beds and finding additional shelters, but also talking about the upstream activities that we need to be looking at. What are the triggers for homelessness? Medical bills being one of them. The lack of job income and job growth is another one of them, but also looking at current policies and making sure people understand. Right to counsel is still pending in our state house. So is the transfer fee, so is linkage. And I have to bring those up because those are resources that we need in order to implement a lot of what this commission is going to recommend. We need the funding, and we need also the community to grow in terms of advocates. And so I wanted to just know that this is it's a whole kind of economy that we're setting up. And I'm so excited about that conversation. In terms of the next steps that we will be having today on this particular ordinance, we're going to combine panels 1 and 2 to allow for them to speak kind of all in one, and then the counselors will have any questions that we may have. I know that Moses Hakobian has noted that he has to leave by 5:15, so I want to make sure that we get through all of the great testimony, things that are working, their suggestions, concerns, so on and so forth. Panels 1 and 2, some questions from the counselors, we'll move through that, and then we'll go to panels 3 and 4. After today's hearing, we will then have a working session to specifically work out any suggestions said today, look at the public testimony. Councillor Asabi George and I will look at both of those and to make sure that we have all perspectives on this particular ordinance, and that will be discussed publicly in a working session. And then if there's consensus and excitement and if we're moving forward, I will happily bring this up for a vote for my colleagues this year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Councillor Sabi George, who will kick off the first panel.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and I'd like to just pass it right to Christy, who will start our first panel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I am sharing my screen. Can I just get a confirmation that you do see my screen? Thank you, Counselor. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to be sharing our information with you. I'm going to turn it right over to my esteemed colleague, Larry Siemens, to launch our presentation.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Madam Chair, Councillor Sabi George, for bringing to light a pressing social issue here in the city, and to the rest of the council and my colleagues for joining us today. Many of us look familiar to each other. We work with each other every day, either in City Hall or in the community. And most of us have participated in the annual homelessness census done every January that's led by D&D. And I know we've been doing that for a very long time. And I imagine if we think back during those cold winters, as we walked up and down the streets of Boston, did any of us actually see a homeless family? It's very rare to see a family on the street in a January evening. However, the data from the most recent census has pointed out probably the most pressing social issue in the city of Boston. So we are the 21st most populous state of the country. And yet, according to the data from last year's census, we have the third highest number of homeless families and children in our city. The third highest, despite being the 21st most populous state. I know we're ranked high in a lot of things that we're proud of, but this isn't one of them. I think the challenge before us is that those families make up some of the poorest families in the city of Boston, predominantly led by single women of color. And there are so many homeless children and parents that tonight, if you emptied out a Pine Street Inn or Boston Children's Hospital, you could fill each of them 6.5 times or 5.5 times respectively. That is how many homeless children are living in our city right now. The homeless count that we've all participated in doesn't take into account the children that Councilor Sabi George had just mentioned. The 5,000 homeless children noted by the Boston Public Schools includes those children who are doubled up, living illegally in most cases with other families to make ends meet. Because the driver for homeless families, unlike adults where the issues are predominantly mental health and substance use disorders, for homeless families and children, it's sheer poverty. We have over 65,000 children and parents living below the poverty line in a city where the average income necessary to have a comfortable life is over $90,000 a year. And yet we have 65,000 children and parents who are living below $30,000 for a family of 3. That's the economic reality, I think, for many of our working families. The numbers are the numbers from the census that we've all worked on putting together as part of the National Federal Census. And the issue is large and complicated. And what we want to share with you today is not only this scope, but really the impacts, especially on the youngest members of our community. And then what we hope to be maybe some ways that the council and the commission can help. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate Barron.
So could you go back to the past slide? Thank you. Before we go to my next slide, hi, I'm Kate Baran, and I am the CEO of Horizons for Homeless Children, and it's wonderful to be here today. I want to follow up on Larry's number of 2,300 children who are homeless. There are 4 things that I can tell you already about those children, having not met them. First of all, they are the lucky few because they actually are registered in a shelter. Only 28% of the homeless population, family homeless population, typically end up in shelter. I can also tell you they will likely be in shelter for 18 months, as that's the average length of stay in a Boston shelter today. Very few of them will access the services available to them by the state and federal government. Why? Because they're not aware they exist, or it's very hard and time-consuming to gain access to those services, and the families are overwhelmed with just trying to survive. I can also say that all of those children will have lifelong negative impacts from this experience. You may wonder why I say with such conviction that this experience will have lifelong impacts. And it's because we know children and we know how they develop. Now you can go to the next slide, thank you. For those children under 6, which we think there are approximately 900 sheltered in Boston, we know that birth to age 5 is when 90% of the human brain is developed. And over 10 years ago, the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard established that toxic stress of homelessness materially impacts brain architecture. It weakens the brain, literally. It happens because at this age, children thrive on consistency, routines, and that wonderful feedback loop from a caring parent to a child, the serve and return. They burp, you smile, they laugh, you coo. Homelessness introduces an uncertainty, a chaos, and a lack of routines that create fear and insecurity And a parent's bandwidth is literally so taxed with getting through the day that it's almost impossible for them to really mentally and emotionally be present for their child. So we see all sorts of attachment issues develop. We see it every day at Horizons when children arrive. They show up with clear signs of physical and developmental delays and are often unable to self-regulate. So what does that really look like? It looks like a child who's 2.5 years old, who should be running about, who will come into Horizon day after day and just sit on the floor and not interact with anyone else. They're so overwhelmed by their life. We literally have to begin the process of teaching that child how to first connect and then begin to walk and do the things that are normally happening at 2.5 years old. So it's not surprising that we see these statistics about homeless children having 3 times the rate of emotional and behavioral problems. If we move to the next slide and focus on school-aged children, you'll see a different phenomenon. And I apologize, I believe there's a typo on this page that says BPS 14,000. It should say 5. I apologize for that typo. But what we know about school-aged children with those 5,000 is, again, the impacts are powerfully negative. These children are 4 times more likely to experience developmental delays and twice as likely to have learning disabilities, to repeat a grade, or to be sick at twice the rate of their peers. With statistics like these, we're literally setting this next generation up to perpetuate the cycle, which frankly, unfortunately, having been on the board of Horizons for 20 years, I can tell you that we thought 20 years ago that we could end the issue, and now I'm seeing the second generation of the children that we had. You know, in terms of seeing that second wave of, a lot of the parents we talk to have been in the system as children. So we have in fact not solved this riddle. And now I'm going to turn it over to another colleague, Danielle, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we might be able to do and put in place.
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair, and City Councilors for your time and for giving us an opportunity to talk both about what data we do have and the larger scope. We know what the problems are on a macro level, right? We know that currently the city and the state lack both a strategic and systematic approach to preventing, addressing, and ending family homelessness. We know that services are hard to access, limited, and are not coordinated for families across systems. We know that we have inconsistent data. So, for example, Department of Education has some of the most comprehensive data on homeless children. And typically most of us would assume the Department of Housing and Community Development would have that. But unfortunately, just based on the breakdown of how our systems work, what we see is it's hard to give an exact number. So often you'll hear us talking about the data of kids and families in shelter, but the system and the spectrum of families as it relates to homelessness is much broader. So what we tried to do here, this is a bit of a complex slide. And so I'm going to try to do this justice in a couple of minutes, respecting time. We wanted to take some solid research from the Aspen Institute, who does amazing research, very valid, reliable. And you see here 5 kind of wheels that interconnect. And really, as someone who's a social worker, the way I think about this is the different domains of life, right? This is how we all function in our world. And so there's all these different parts of your life. And when we have to create services for them, we structure them in a necessary and bureaucratic structure, right? Where there's funding that comes in from the federal government to the state, to the city, to different agencies, and then there's eligibility requirements. And so one of the things that we know happens, if you look here, truthfully, we use mostly state entities. And I did that on purpose with the team of us that were working on this, because a lot of our services are delivered through the state, right? And the goal is for the city and the state and the feds, ideally, for all of those to coordinate. And, I think folks try really hard, but what we see is if we ask families, there are 11 state agencies listed here, right? If we ask families to have to access 11 different spots in order to receive all services, to pull it together what they need to move out of homelessness and stay stably housed, that's a pretty big lift, right? It's a big lift on anybody who's not homeless, let alone folks who are homeless, right? And who don't have a place where they know that they're necessarily going to be every day. And so we really wanted to give this example as one way to say the types of things that we're going to talk about in the pitch for the special commission are looking at these type of systems and trying to figure out what do we do, right? What do we recommend? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy.
And so this brings us to our call to action, because as Councillor Flaherty said, we need a call to action and we need to be clear on what we're going to be delivering. So our ask of you today is that we would like to create and form a special commission to develop an equitable, comprehensive action plan to end and prevent family homelessness. This plan will intentionally address the systemic structural racism that, as we've heard and we know, created generational pathways to homelessness. And this commission will include, but not limit itself to, really focusing in on redlining and zone laws that currently exist. Another call to action would be that we create a report with strong policy recommendations and strategy recommendations to the council within a 12-month time frame. So it's limited. We're keeping this report to something that it will be something that we're held accountable for and to you. And we're going to be using our data-driven strategies and best practices to create this report with community and with leaders throughout the city of Boston. And then our last call to action ask is really using what we've learned from the City Commission as a proxy to scale the special commission here to a statewide initiative. We're going to use our lessons learned in strategies and policies to set priorities, because we know that the City of Boston has housed more than 30% of the homeless families, and that resources need to be thought about across the state, not just within the city. So that is our call to action, and we would welcome, we're not going to do questions, we're going to wait until after. So I wanted to put our names up and pass it on to the next panel. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and turn over to the next panel. I believe that's with Mosik and Christine and Felicia. You want to kick it off, Mosik? If so, you're on mute.
I
accidentally. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Not really, not that great. Mosik.
All right, let me see if this is better. So I accidentally advanced the slide, the first slide, which this.
Mosik, maybe if you shut your video off, it would be a little bit better on the audio.
Figure out how to do that.
On the bottom left-hand corner, stop video. Oh, sorry, I meant not stop sharing, but stop.
I know, I had to do that.
That hasn't helped though.
Maybe if you were to call in the number, Mosik, and just talk on a regular phone, we can hear you and still you could do your presentation.
So does this work at all, or should I dial in?
I think she's dial in.
Mosik, do you want me to start and then you jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right,
Please.
okay, wait, the slides are great. All right, thanks, Mosik, and thank you, Councillor Edwards. Thank you, Councillor Asabi George, for the opportunity to testify today and share some of our experience with addressing family homelessness focused on children in Boston Public Schools. And we support the proposal to create a special commission on ending family homelessness. Boston schools educate 50,480 students, including an estimated 8% that are homeless. Educators try hard to improve outcomes in Boston schools. Housing developers and advocates work hard to address the issue of homelessness exacerbated by the soaring housing market in Boston. The two efforts, while necessary and important, are implemented separately, although they are trying to address the needs of many of the same families. The family-led stability pilot, the partners consist of Boston Public Schools, Boston Housing Authority, the Department of Neighborhood Development, City Councilor Anissa Sabi-George, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, Project Hope, New Lease for Homeless Families, and Higher Ground. Together, we launched an innovative collaborative pilot in January 2018, focused on 7 schools in Roxbury and Dorchester to bridge these two efforts that I just mentioned and to achieve quicker and more sustainable results. We leverage the capacities of schools, housing, health, and other service providers to house homeless families with children in Boston schools, reduce family homelessness, improve educational outcomes for the children, and support families to achieve their self-defined social and economic goals. Through the FLSP, we seek to demonstrate the following system change impacts: to support homeless families to take charge of efforts to access housing and services, to leverage capacities of schools to streamline access to housing and other services necessary for family stability and educational success, to leverage capacities of case managers at shelters and homeless liaisons at schools, to connect families of homeless students to housing resources and share key data with the FLSP partners, to coordinate across public agencies in education, housing, and health sectors to meet the needs of homeless families, to demonstrate the value and effectiveness of place-based community partners to help schools and BPS solve the growing challenge of homeless students in Boston schools, to mobilize practitioners focused on education, housing, and health to collectively advocate for solutions and resources and avoid being pitted against each other in public policy and resource allocation decisions. And to build on the success of the pilot, FLSP will work with the City of Boston and BPS to support families and children across all Boston schools to overcome the challenge of homelessness in the entire district. Mosik, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to jump in for this part? I'm going to keep going. Our goal is to house the estimated 295 homeless students in the 7 schools by the end of the upcoming school year, the 2021 school year, and lay the groundwork for scaling up the pilot to more of the 125 schools in Boston. To this end, actually, let me keep going. As of July 2020, we had housed, you can see the data here that on the screen. As of July 20, we had housed families of 205 formerly homeless students and expect to house families of the remaining estimated 90 students during the 2021 school year, the 3rd and final year of the pilot. Increasing the number of housing units available to families is a core strategy within this work. And thus far, we've housed 127 families using 42 BHA vouchers, 15 units through New Lease for homeless family, through New Lease for homeless families, 16 of 35 units that were committed by BHA for this pilot initiative, 26 home-based resources, and 28 through various other resources. The participants in the collaborative effort have demonstrated significant progress in terms of improved communication and shared information within bounds of confidentiality across the educational and housing systems. This initial progress is also important in that it is a foundation for the evaluation work that we are conducting to demonstrate the impact of the pilot program on educational improvements for the formerly homeless students, as well as improved outcomes for the target schools. The FLSP partners have engaged the UMass Center for Social Policy to conduct the evaluation, and the Moakley Center for Public Management at Suffolk University to support data tracking and analysis. Our success in delivering on promises of the FLSP pilot phase have laid the foundation to help leverage the additional resources to house hundreds more homeless students in Boston and substantially improve educational outcomes for all students. The longer-term success of FLSP is the system change we have already ushered in with collective impact of 8 public sector and nonprofit partners, coordinating efforts to achieve better results efficiently and effectively across housing and educational systems with related positive impacts in the health and economic circumstances of the families that stable housing make possible. FLSP partners have collaborated in the design and implementation of an effective service delivery model summarized in the following steps. Homeless liaisons at each school identify homeless children and offer them the opportunity to connect to FLSP partners. Number 2, the parent organizers and outreach workers at DSNI and Higher Ground maintain strong relationships with school staff, attend school site councils and parent council meetings, and share information about FLSP. Then interested families meet with family advocates at Project Hope and Higher Ground, complete an intake and authorization form, allowing FLSP family advocates to access data about the students and their families that impacts their attendance and academic performance. BHA and New Lease informs FLSP partners about available units and rent subsidies, and FLSP partners support families to complete and submit applications for housing and resources that address their family composition and needs. FLSP partners also assist families to access donated household goods and other critical resources. In addition, beginning in March 2020, and as a result of the impact of COVID, FLSP partners also provided financial resources to meet urgent family needs. Family advocates continue to work closely with families following their move into housing to ensure they remain stably housed and that they are connected to additional services. And we measure progress along several indicators. One is the length of time from intake to housing. Another is attendance. A third is family economic circumstances, and then social emotional learning. So I'll close with a couple stories, or a story about a family who was impacted by the FLSP support. We learned about the plight of a grandmother of 2 granddaughters attending one of the schools. Both children were under the age of 10, and the grandmother had been their sole caregiver for several years. Almost 1 year prior to our meeting her, they became homeless. For several months, they lived in 2 shelters, and their lives were in a constant state of upheaval until our organization stepped in to give this family the help they desperately needed. A quote from the grandmother is, "My family advocate is so sweet. She came to visit me and my granddaughters where we were living. She helped me find a lawyer, and she helped me complete paperwork that I didn't understand. Now I have a Section 8 voucher, and we are finally looking for permanent housing. I don't know what I would have done without the help." Thank you so much for giving us the time to share our experiences and some of these stories and solutions to family homelessness.
Thank you. Wasn't sure if Mosaic was able to call in. I don't see him as one of the participants.
So I was not able to call in for some reason. The meeting ID did not work, so I just listened in.
And now you're perfectly clear.
Now you're perfect. Yeah. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think Christine covered it all. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have between now and 5:15 when I have to leave.
Understood. Thank you. I think Felicia was going to go in this as well.
Thank you for having me, Councilor Sabi George and Madam Chair. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that Sojourner House does. And I'll start with Sojourner House is a small family shelter for the homeless. We are strategically located in Roxbury, where our families have access to public transportation and within walking distance to local stores. We can accommodate up to 9 families at a time. Our referrals come from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and we're one of the few handicap accessible shelters in Massachusetts, and we were also one of the first to accept both male and female parents. Once a family has been identified, we work with them on the unique barriers that have prevented them from becoming housed. And what does that actually look like? It looks like providing intensive case management, finding employment, job training, working with the families on sealing their quarries, trying to work with them on rebuilding their credit, repairing their credit as well. And once we do that, we start working with them on stabilization. Once the family has identified housing, we track that family for up to a year, just making sure that they're acclimated to their new neighborhood. And we provide services for them, checking in and making sure that there are any community resources that they need, that we're able to connect them with those resources. In addition to the shelter, Sojourner House owns affordable housing in Milton, Roxbury, and Dorchester. And we also have a food pantry, which is accessible to our families here at the shelter and to the community at large as well. One of the things I do want to talk about is the round table. The round table has been very helpful and it's been critical in the work that we do. It has allowed a voice for homeless shelters with issues that are impacting our families. It has made room for deeper conversations regarding homelessness. And it has also been just a great resource to the families here and the staff as well. We like to make sure that our staff is representative of the families that we serve. And we think that the special commission is a great concept to continue this fight to end homelessness. It will allow the city and the state agencies to come together with one common goal, and that is to end homelessness and to prevent other families from experiencing homelessness again. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you so much for your testimony. I just learned from the chair, or excuse me, from the sponsor that there's only really one other panel. I thought there were 2. So if it's okay at this point, we're going to go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I cut over. Was there another person in the panel too? Nope, Christine Dixon spoke. So I'm going to go ahead and have the administration finish in terms of testimony. And then we can, I think, open it up because we're running really well on time. And so if the administration, if you want to, I don't know how long your presentation is, but if it's, within 5 to 10 minutes, I think that really sets us up for the robust conversation that we can have. Does that work for you, Sheila and Courtney and Dominique?
Most certainly does. And I think we will be certainly brief and to the point.
Excellent. All right, I'll turn it over to you.
So thank you so much for having this today. And I do want to thank again Councilor Sabi George for always making this issue front and foremost. And all of the city council. I mean, I think that we've all had this issue very close to our hearts, and we've done a lot of good work. But it's going to be very exciting to bring all of that work together and coordinate better. I will say, for the record, the city of Boston and all of our departments are very, very excited about working on the special commission with the special commission on ending family homelessness. So we are very supportive of this commission and look forward to rolling up our sleeves and being a meaningful partner. And my thought when I was sitting here listening to all these nonprofits, incredibly talented nonprofits, that we know what to do, right? We know what to do. We need coordination and probably more resources, or most definitely more resources, but we know what to do because so many of these nonprofits in our infrastructure have been doing such a fabulous job for so long. I will say, while the city has a plan on individual homelessness and most recently youth homelessness, we don't have a plan for family homelessness. But I do want to say, for the record, that's not to say that a lot of good work isn't already being done or being done in that area. And Courtney and Dominique are going to get into more of the details. But from my vantage point, we are assisting, we are helping, we are committed by building affordable housing and set-asides in each and every development that we do for homeless families. The BHA most recently made vouchers available, 1,000 of them for homeless families in the Boston Public School system. They prioritize their public housing. There's lots of work going on to prevent families from becoming homeless, because while we want to make sure that families that do become homeless get the services they need, get affordable housing, and move quickly and get their families stabilized, we really need to also focus on preventing all of that from happening in the first place. I also want to have this commission work very closely with us on expanding resources. City resources have expanded for homeless families and individuals, but I think we also need to work as a commission to expand federal and state resources as well. And finally, before I hand it over to Courtney to get more in the details, I am very excited that in the 2021 fiscal budget, and thank you very much to the City Council for passing it and for lobbying for some of these very important investments, that we will have money set aside for a homeless family coordinator who will really help on the D&D end to shepherd a lot of this work. So I personally am really excited about this commission. I'm excited about working with you all. And with that, I'll hand it over to Courtney Trudell. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George, for scheduling the hearing and for your continued support of the work that we do at the Department of Neighborhood Development and housing our most vulnerable citizens. I want to start off with some numbers and realize in hearing other numbers that this in a bit points to some of the complexity of this issue. In August of this year, we have 843 families composed of 3,020 adults and children that were sheltered in Boston. And that includes 2,068 people under the age of 18. These numbers are a little different from what we've heard from Larry at Family Aid, and then also from Councilor Sabi George. And a lot of it has to do with how different systems of care for families experiencing homelessness count those families and how they consider them experiencing homelessness and what that experience is. So I think that it's telling that as we're all giving accurate views of families experiencing homelessness, they're all coming from different perspectives. The Boston has a number of programs and dedicated service providers that house, shelter, and support homeless and at-risk families. D&D's Supported Housing Division funds significant investments in permanent housing programs, such as rapid rehousing and permanent supported housing, as well as connecting families to permanent homes through the city's inclusionary development program and initiatives with the Boston Housing Authority. In total, the city and its partners offer 2,670 permanent homes for families experiencing homelessness. D&D and the Boston Continuum of Care, a network of homeless service providers, champion Boston's efforts to prevent and end homelessness for all populations. However, there are certain components of the family homelessness system that go well beyond our portfolio of HUD-funded resources. For example, the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development administers the Emergency Assistance Family Shelter Program. Metro Housing Boston, one of the 9 regional housing nonprofits in the state, administers the state Residential Assistance for Families in Transition, RAFT, and home-based funds. The Massachusetts Department of Children and Families oversees child welfare placements and the domestic violence funding resources. And the Boston Housing Authority administers public housing, HUD Section 8 vouchers, and a smaller number of state rental assistance vouchers. The breadth of resources necessitates system coordination to ensure resources reach families with the greatest needs, to promote a more housing-centered family homelessness system, and to strengthen housing pathways and eviction prevention partnerships. The Commission will provide thought leadership and barrier busting to address the complex challenges that impact a family struggling to maintain stable housing or return to a permanent home after shelter. And the Commission's work and their plan will be strongly linked to the actions of the continuum of care. Its plan will inform and direct the COC's work to fund housing programs and how families will access those programs, and the sectors represented in the membership of the commission and their overlap with the COC's implementation partners will create continuity and can leverage those relationships to end family homelessness. In anticipation of this ordinance, as Sheila mentioned, D&D secured funding to create a new role, an advisor on family homelessness. Through the advisor's work supporting the commission and the Boston's continuum of care, the advisor will convene the commission to create a comprehensive plan and bring together family shelter providers and funders to support a collaborative housing-centric culture, coordinate efforts with the Boston Housing Authority to target family-oriented housing interventions, coordinate and advocate with state systems of care to improve outcomes on complex cases and fix systemic issues, increase resources and support the scaling up of family homelessness prevention efforts led by the Office of Housing Stability, and importantly, track the collective efforts to house homeless families and prevent evictions in Boston. The advisor will be a driver connecting the design work of the commission to the implementation by the continuum of care and D&D. And in conclusion, the Support Housing Division sees its work closely tied to the mission of the commission, and we welcome hearing the ideas of the providers in the community as we work together to end family homelessness. And I will turn it over to Dominique to talk more about some of the prevention programs and resources.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you, Councilor Asabi George, for calling this hearing today. I want to thank you for always advocating for housing homeless families in Boston and for ensuring that our Office of Housing Stability always has a seat at the table. I send special thanks to you, specifically from the members of my office who are not able to be here today in person, but who always have a seat at the table. Kathy Miranda, Katie Ford, and Vielkas Gonzalez, who are frequent attendees at the panels and who are also always coming back to our office very energized to tackle on the issues and to give us key updates about the work that you guys are doing. So thank you. For the record, my name is Dominique Williams, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Housing Stability. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and we'll answer at the end any questions that you have about the Office of Housing Stability and the role that we play in preventing family homelessness in Boston. The city and its partners have been working hard during this pandemic to ensure that families and individuals have the resources that they need to know their tenant rights, find shelter, and ultimately stay in their homes. Our team is pretty small, but since January 1st, 2020, our 7-person office has handled 10,102 calls, and we've opened 6,282 cases. By comparison, in all of 2019, we opened up only 3,568 cases. So we've been busy. OHS has a housing hotline where we have experienced a drastic increase in the number of calls coming in during this COVID-19 crisis. And as it started to unfold in the early days, OHS specifically tracks calls to our hotline where constituents are looking for help finding immediate shelter. From March 1st through May 31st of 2020, OHS received 1,082 such calls for immediate shelter. And during the same period in 2019, we only received 632 calls for the same resource. OHS oversees 2 hotel placement programs for qualifying households. Our nonprofit contractors provide intensive case management, housing search, and placement assistance for eligible families, income eligible families. This is a program really of last resort that was designed to meet an otherwise unmet need for emergency shelter, as applicants have to have been denied emergency assistance by the DHCD to be eligible. In order to be eligible for emergency placement under EHAP or FSMP, a household must include physical custody of a minor under the age of 18 and have been either a resident or recently displaced from Boston. So from March through May of 2020, OHS significantly increased the number of households served through this last resort program. Because of that increased demand, During that time period, we served 32 families and incurred a total cost of $188,977, which is an increase of 36% over the cost for the same period in 2019. We attribute the rise in services to the fact that people were not able to access other shelter options. Typically, families had to stay in our short-term program for longer because of the increases in the processing time for DHCD applications, and because non-emergency shelters outside of the state system of care were at capacity or were not accepting new residents. So the emergency assistance that our office was able to provide in the early days of the pandemic helped to keep families safe and healthy through a really frightening time. I know that you also had some questions also about just the larger landscape. To take a look at what's happening in terms of housing insecurity in Boston, we can really only take our cues from projecting statistics that don't distinguish specifically among families with minor children and individuals. We pull our data from census data. So in 2020, we know that 65% of Boston households are renters. According to the US Census Housing Pulse Survey, which was performed a couple of weeks ago, back in late July, approximately 25% of Boston renter households expressed that they had either no or slight confidence in their ability to pay August's rent. The Stout Institute estimated that 28,000 low-income households in the city were likely at risk of eviction after the end of the state moratorium on October 17th. And in addition to that, MAPC estimates that 10,793 renter households who received CARES Act benefits would need additional rental assistance since those benefits ended in August. And D&D personally estimates that an additional 4,400 undocumented renters will also need assistance meeting their housing costs. So as a current reality, we know that tenant and renter protections is in greater need than ever. Currently, OHS is working to finalize our post-eviction moratorium plans to ensure that we're ready for October 17th. Thanks to the City Council approval of the fiscal year 2021 budget, OHS was able to increase to one additional full-time position, so bringing us up to 2 positions for the Housing Court Navigator program, which directs households in court facing eviction to financial and legal resources. We're working with our communications department to target informational mailers about our office to the areas of the city that we know will probably have high numbers of eviction cases once the moratorium is lifted. And finally, we're also working to finalize our proposed ordinance that would require all landlords to provide information about our office with all notices to quit issued in the city. So you guys will be seeing that soon. Finally, of course, we set aside a combined $8 million in the first 2 rounds of our rental relief funds in April and June, and we're finalizing the application process for the 3rd round of funding, which will be out soon. We're hoping to coincide that next round with the opening of the housing court, so we can prioritize cases to quickly get those funds into the hands of the people who are in the most desperate need. So in closing, the Office of Housing Stability is well positioned to both address the needs of Boston households through this crisis. We have been. We're extremely passionate about using this moment to find creative solutions to help stabilize the housing of our city's families going forward. And we're looking forward to feedback and any questions from you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I wanted to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Councilor Arroyo. Before I turn it over to him for any brief statement he may have, I just wanted to acknowledge and bring into the room the fact that we lost a great hero and justice warrior and a stalwart supporter of right to counsel, and that is Judge Gantz. He has died today, and I met him when I was clerking at the Superior Court. I've known him, and he's by far one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And he was there for housing justice and for right to counsel. So calling on my colleagues at the State House, I would hope that they maybe consider passing that incredible law in his honor. But for now, I'm going to turn it back over to Councilor Arroyo. But again, I don't think we will really understand how much we're missing in the legal field and in the mindset by having lost Judge Gantz today. So Ricardo Arroyo, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo your sentiments on Justice Gantz. I just want to briefly send my thoughts and prayers to his family. Justice Gantz, as a public defender, was a justice who we knew very well. He worked as a prosecutor, but was always dedicated to the cause of justice and trying to understand what brought people into the situations in which they were in. His voice, his presence will be missed, and he's somebody who, even before he was a judge, was doing community work in Eggleston, at ESNA, and all these different areas. And so he's certainly somebody who will be missed. And so that's heavy news today. Beyond that, I just want to thank everybody on this call, or this Zoom meeting, rather, this hearing, to discuss an issue that's pivotal, that impacts so many people. As a public defender, I can tell you, people use all kinds of words, and the one that I used to use for my clients was stabilization. The biggest issue that almost all of my clients had was the inability to be stabilized. And generally speaking, that meant an income, that meant whether it was medical treatment, but almost always what it really meant was that they were either homeless or functionally homeless. They were couch surfing, they were staying with other people. They would run out of time in one home and have to find another one. And it was in those cracks and in those places where they couldn't find permanent stability that so many of the things that plague us and plague them existed and took root and got worse. And so this is a crucial issue to address. And I'm grateful to Councilor Asabi George for her efforts throughout her career on the council, but also now in this hearing. And I look forward to continuing to hear from all of you about ways we can really do this, because the impact, it bleeds into so many different things. It impacts so many different issues when you're actually stabilized in your housing. And we'll see the results of that if we're able to accomplish our goals in a real way in many families and in many homes and in many communities. So it's a big deal. So thank you again to everybody for taking the time today to discuss it.
I'll just jump in here while Councilor Edwards is off screen. Just thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for that. I do have a couple of comments, not so much questions, as I work with these fine folks pretty regularly every single day. I do want to note just some of the presentation today. We noted some different numbers that didn't seem to match up. And one of the greatest challenges that we've sort of uncovered through our work in the roundtable is, because so much of the work happens in silos, because so many of the supports are only offered in particular silos and in different sort of degrees of combination, the numbers and the data don't always match. And one of our efforts through the course of the roundtable, and I'm certain one of the efforts of the special commission, will be to better understand the data and to make sense of it. And so that we're comparing and discussing apples and apples and oranges, because unless we know those true numbers, it's really hard to make some significant achievements. And that continues to be, that those, the different systems of care, the different silos, the different data points, the different ways of collecting information, whether it's based on the parent name and the caregiver name or the child's name, has really created some big challenges when we think about this work. And then we add on, very often, Boston families housed outside of the city or sheltered outside of the city, families housed and sheltered in the city, the relationship with schools, the relationships with healthcare, the relationships with other systems of care really create some challenges to sort of doing this work and getting to a point where we can say we've got some actionable goals or we're getting to them. But the work of the roundtable, I will say, has developed a pretty robust and long list of actionable items. In fact, there is a statewide effort that is underway to do something similar to what we're looking to do here. And I'm happy to be a part of that effort. And we're sharing some of our roundtable work with that statewide organization, because why reinvent the wheel? Why do that when we've covered a lot of that ground? And for me, this special commission is really a great transitioning point, because the work in my office since I took office in 2016 and currently is really being led by Rachel and my policy director in my office, we've sort of reached our capacity. So we're excited about and grateful for the efforts and the support of the mayor and Chief Dillon to fund this family advisor position, because we've hit a little bit of our max, although we look forward to being involved in everything going forward. But we've got lots to we've got lots of information to share, and we'll continue to work in a different way. And I do want to just answer very quickly a question that came up in Councilor Flaherty's opening statements around the setting goals, making sure that it's a real commission, that there's a robust effort. Through the details of this ordinance is drafted, and certainly as it will be amended through our working session process under the leadership of the chair, we very specifically have outlined some very measurable things. We want this commission to exist for a short period of time, set goals, achieve them, and then disappear. The way that we want family homelessness to disappear. And not only end family homelessness, but when it does occur, make sure that it's as brief as possible. So in those details, we are hoping within the first 60 days of this commission, special commission being formed. And that is why also we've called it a special commission, to help heighten and elevate not just the work, but heighten and elevate the urgency of this work, that this is going to start immediately. And I guess I shouldn't say start, it's a continuation of some of the roundtable work, I think in a slightly more significant way, especially in partnership with the mayor's office and Chief Dillon's department. But within 60 days that this commission would meet, and the work really hopefully would be wrapped up and done within a short period of time. We're hoping 5 years, but we think over the first year, that using some of the foundation that's been laid by the roundtable and the steps that we've identified that fall under the authority of the city or the state or the federal government, we've got a plan that's been drafted that I think will turn into something much more substantial once this special commission is formed. So I am just very grateful. And I said before we went live in this hearing today, the roundtable series has included many, many more people than are with us today. But I'm so grateful to the work of both the shelter providers and those with lived experience who have worked with us to get to this point. And I'm so excited to sort of be taking this next step with all of you and spreading this word. We hope this work at the state level too, which is underway. But I will note, not that we're in competition with the state, but they are a few steps behind us. We're a few steps ahead. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to turn this back over to you, but we look forward to moving quickly with that working session. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone who's with us.
Thank you very much. So going in order of arrival, we'll have Councillor Flynn, then Councillor Mejia, then Councillor Bach. Let's see if some of the folks may have stepped off. I don't see Councillor Flynn.
I'm sorry, Councillor Edward, excuse me, Councillor Edwards, I believe that Councillor Flynn was before me, so just unclear about the order.
Yes, so it will go to you now if he's not here.
Oh, he's not here, okay.
So go ahead. Councillor Mejia?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay,
great. So I'm gonna turn off my phone because I'm having a hard time with my computer. So thank you. I see some of my people here, so I'm excited. Mosaic and Christine, you guys, we've been working in this space for a long time in many different capacities. So I'm really happy to see all the work that the Higher Ground has been doing and Project Hope. And so it gives me a lot of great joy in knowing that you all are a part of this effort. So really excited to support you both in this endeavor. I know a lot of the families that we talk about are families that we work with and have worked with and continue to work with. So this is not a new conversation. It's just dressed up in a very different outfit in a different decade. But the issue of housing instability in the city of Boston continues to be chronic and persistent. So I'm happy that we are here today having this conversation. So I guess I
think we've lost you, Councillor Mejia.
Councillor Mejia, please unmute yourself.
Sorry?
You're on mute, Councillor Mejia.
Was I on mute the whole entire time?
No, just for the last couple seconds. And so
I was gonna.
you
Sorry,
could,
this is what happens.
whatever question you have.
Sorry, I just pulled over so that I could be safe. Conchole. So my question really is, I see that the commission, the way it's set up now, that there'll be elected officials and then also different members of like nonprofit organizations and people with lived experience. And I'm just curious, I believe you have 10 elected to be part of the commission. And I'm just curious about how do we get to that number of having 10 elected officials on this commission, and I believe only 8 or so for nonprofits. Can you just talk to me a little bit about how we got to that number?
So Madam Chair, it might be best if I answer that question.
Yes, I apologize. I'm having technical difficulties now on this new thing. So if I end up falling off, Counselor Asabi George, if you would go ahead and I will text you the order and figure out what's going on.
I do have a record of the order. Thank you, Madam Chair. So for elected officials, we are, as part of this ordinance, recommending that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elected officials, not 10. We think that it's really important that because so much of the work that happens at the state level impacts our city's response to family homelessness, that we both have a member of the Boston City Council, the mayor of the city of Boston, or his or her designee, the governor of Massachusetts, or his or her designee, a representative from the Boston delegation, the House of Representatives, as well as a member of the Boston delegation from the Massachusetts Senate. We think it's really important because legislative work and policy so directly impacts sort of the outcomes on the other end. So Juliet, Councilor Mejia, I see that you've returned. There's only 5 elected officials as listed on the ordinance as presented.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. As I mentioned, I was driving, so I was under the impression it was 10. So and then I'm just curious, and I'm not sure who would answer this question. When it comes to representation and to voice, when you're thinking about those who have lived experience, are you going to be working with the nonprofit organizations to identify community residents, or what does that process look like?
I imagine if anyone, any of the providers that have been a part of the roundtable series want to jump in, I would welcome that. But we, through that work, have worked with families who have very specifically wanted to be a part of these conversations. So I imagine through perhaps the work of the roundtable, we'd identify those families, as we would also identify the members, the nonprofit partners that would also be at the table. I'll also note, just for those at home that maybe don't have a copy of the ordinance before them, we've also asked that there is a representative that's that works in the food distribution field to be at the table, because food insecurity is an important part of the work that we need to do to prevent homelessness, but also in response to any family who's experiencing homelessness or most recently found permanent housing. Food is a really important piece of that effort. Did anyone else have thoughts or comments about the families with lived experience? I'd also add, Councilor Mejia, that one of the edits that we're exploring making to the ordinance, that there would be an opportunity for compensation, especially for families who would be participating in this commission. It's been done in some other places, so we'd want to look at that closely and discuss that in further detail through a follow-up working session.
Yeah, I would highly advocate for that. It always appears that those who are working in the space it's easier for them to show up, but people who are living the realities are always asked to volunteer their time and their wit and their intellect. So if there are any ways to remove those barriers by providing compensation, that would be a great incentive for a lot of folks. And obviously also providing childcare and dinner is just as equally as important. And I will advocate for that. And then I'm just curious in terms of just the roundtables, in terms of
I know you've been at this for a long time, Councilor Sabi George. I'm really grateful for the work that you've been doing in the space. I'm just curious about, have any of those roundtables, have you had people who speak diverse, different languages? Have there any of those roundtables been, have there been anything in very specific languages, whether it be Haitian Creole or Spanish, to really kind of help understand the magnitude of the issue?
The roundtables have not been outward facing, they've been interfacing. When we've done some of our work at the different shelters and with those providers, we've had translation services for the families that have been present in those rooms.
Great.
When,
And would that be part of
when they've been outward facing, yes, but internally for our regular roundtable meetings, they have not been.
And is that something that you think of as, even though it's only for a 5-year span, is looking at how we can ensure that even whether or not you're part of the, like, we're removing barriers to engagement for folks who want to be a part of it, but that may not know how to speak English?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely something that we'll look at. I just made a note of it. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I'm going to continue with rounds and we'll circle back unless any of the panelists have something to add regarding the membership question or the language question. Thank you. Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Councilor Sabi George. Again, just really appreciate. I'm excited. I've been excited watching your roundtable over many years now, and I'm excited at the idea of it becoming like concrete and, like you say, kind of elevating this issue. I think my biggest set of questions are about how to get the right forces at the state in the room. And obviously the ordinance anticipates some state folks involved, but also kind of a set of state agencies that might be called upon as necessary. And you just referenced the food issue. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, and in this sense, it could be a question for anybody on the panels, like what piece of the puzzle seems to be missing in terms of coordination? Like, are there specific agencies or angles on this family homelessness problem that you feel like we don't get at the roundtable or we don't get in the conversation and would be a piece of actually making change on this front? I mean, I think Councilor Edwards alluded to, obviously, the eviction issue, and we've got a ton of evidence that repeated evictions drives up families' housing costs and sort of creates these cycles of homelessness. So I can imagine the legal dynamic being one that we'd want in the room. And you just mentioned food, but I would love to hear from you, Councilor Sabi George, if you want, but also from any of the panelists and our city folks about like who we think really needs to be in the room to make tracks on this issue.
I'll start, and I do want to hear from some of our providers who know this better than I do, but I just want to take this opportunity because it reminds me to thank many of our state agency leaders who have come to and city leaders who have come to the roundtable over the last few years. Chief Dillon has been a guest and spoken to the providers. Chief Martinez has spoken to the providers. Mayor Walsh has spoken to the providers. We've also had Secretary Sutters. We've had the DTA, the chief of the DTA join us, DMH join us, DPH has joined us, the superintendent has joined us. So we've had quite the list of agency leaders at our roundtable series to hear from providers directly and to continue not just building relationships and networks, but also I think really learning how to sort of curate the work going forward, especially around a series of RFPs that were going out. To hear from the providers was a really important piece of that work. But I'm going to leave it, who's missing and what's missing. I'm going to leave that question to the rest of the panel. Kate, I want to stay on Danielle and then Kate, because Kate, I want to hear and make sure that you share a little bit about the childcare piece. But Danielle, go ahead.
Let's see, if Kate wants to go first on childcare, that's fine too. No, okay. So let me answer the state question in a broader way than just childcare. So from my experience, the state agencies hold a lot of our long-term service capacity. So when we are trying to access the services, the money coming in, whether it's state or federal, is sitting there, right? Whether it's Department of Mental Health, Department of Developmental Services, Mass Health, right? I could go through the buckets of state entities that hold the service dollars. And so when I think about policy and resourcing and building a system, and really I think about a system, I'm going to try to draw it in the air for folks as kind of a continuum, right? Where somebody can come in at any point in that continuum and they can access the services they need, right? With various end points of exit from a system. We have to coordinate those systems, and that is hard to do when you think about families. And when you think about homelessness, right? We have folks that need services in every bucket of state government, right? Or city support. And so from what we talked about when we sat together at the round table, we really talked about needing to coordinate, right? And you see that in a lot of systems where folks, especially in behavioral health, you started to see a focus on coordination of services, because otherwise you had gaps and you had redundancies in areas. And so from the way we've talked about this, we really need those folks at the table to partner with us. Also because although this is a Boston issue, it's a statewide issue. And so we will do the best in our belief if both the city tackles it and takes a leadership role as it is doing, but also in partnership with the state. And so that was the thinking behind some of the folks that we identified.
Larry, do you want to add something too? So I guess I could speak to the, go ahead, Larry, go.
Yeah. Just to your point, Councillor Bach, there's an interagency council for homelessness at the state level that engages each of the departments that Danielle presented in her presentation. I think representation or engagement with the interagency council that's been very focused on chronic adult homelessness and is now very focused on unaccompanied homelessness. Again, a lot of that is driven by state and federal policy. I think bringing a body together, engaging that larger interagency council like we have in the past for unaccompanied youth and for chronic homeless adults and veterans would be a really good start, and maybe a place to bring and engage that particular agency, because it sits across all the secretariats of the Commonwealth.
Great.
And I think my piece was really to focus on the fact that while this is all going on, these kids desperately need to get access to early childhood education in a high quality setting. And this isn't a pitch for Horizons. This is a pitch for the fact that we still have a system that needs work when it comes to giving children access to early education. It's the only place where they get the routines that they need while they're homeless. And in this state, it's still hard for people to gain access and find either a homeless contract or voucher. And that isn't, that it needs to be addressed, because these kids also, when they arrive in shelter, they should immediately be screened. So that's an issue of, getting the Department of Mental Health to get in and screen children that enter in shelter. Then we got to get them into an early education program. Right now, even if they're getting a voucher or contract, they're paying a parent fee. How can a homeless family pay a parent fee when they sometimes don't have the money to get on a bus and cross town to go to the CCR&R and blah, 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 blah. It's ridiculous. So I guess that's my thought is, while we're fixing things on the council, we also need to be addressing the short-term issue of getting these children the proper care that they need and the proper attention that they require.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Chris, you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. And thank you, Councillor Bach, for the question. I would add 2 additional items on the list that is so thoughtful. Data, comprehensive data, as we heard more than once across the presentation, making sure that our data is consistent across the board. So that way we can start to identify data-driven strategies to start to end family homelessness would be key. And then as Chief Dillon and Courtney know on the phone, and Dominique as well, and my background is housing, so I believe we need landlords at the table, we need developers at the table, nonprofit and profit, and so housing to me is a very important issue that we need to bring to the table.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Councillor Bach. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick one for, I don't know if it's quick, but for Chief Dillon, just around, it was alluded to at the state level. At the city level, we've also had a very successful focus on chronic veterans homelessness that really has kind of gone down the list and tried to solve specific cases. And I think we all know that that sometimes that enormous success is less evident because so many folks come from outside of the city of Boston. And so we're continually we can have a continual pipeline of people to help. But I just wanted to really appreciate that work and ask you what your thoughts are as we think about I think it's a compliment to that work that in many ways we're looking to mirror it with a special focus on family homelessness. And I'd love to know what you feel like you've learned from that process.
No, it's a good question. I think we can learn as we embark on this new targeted, focused work on some of the successes in the past. I think when I look at the vets, there was a lot of new resources, right? So I think we should think big, right? There was VASH, and we hadn't had VASH before, and then the city, is making resources available in the state. So I think, if we're going to solve it, we need big new resources, and who knows, maybe after November, we'll see that. I'm hopeful. It's been mentioned data, so what are we going to do with the resources? Who are the families? Where are they coming from? How long have they been homeless? How many kids do they have? What are their barriers? All of that stuff really leads you to exactly what you need to do. And I am always bowled over. I mean, the commission probably won't do this work, but it should lead to it, of very thoughtful people sitting around with families identified that have not been able to get what they need, and solving family by family. And I hope we get to that, after we identify the resources and the data, and we set up systems, really looking across the system and saying, who's been stuck? Who do we need to focus on, and making that our priority? So it's kind of big work around resources and data, and then it gets very granular, very, very fast if you really, I think, want to make a difference.
And if I could just add to what Chief Dillon was saying, those that are getting into the weeds and making a difference today, it's Courtney, it's Dominique's office, it's Kathy and Katie and Bielkis they're the ones that we call when we have that family that's stuck at some point. And then certainly with the support of the organizations that are here today. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach. I see that.
Councilor Sabi George, if I could just, not another question, just a note to add is just, I actually came to your family homelessness roundtable when I was staffing Billy McGonigal when he came on behalf of the VHA, I think April of last year. And I just wanted to add that I think as we're thinking about who's at the table here, that the Housing Authority, I think has been an important piece of some of these other efforts and is going to continue to be an important piece, both the voucher and public housing side. So I think we may want to find a way to give them a role in this.
Yeah, that's I think
Could I just
oversight of maybe who's on the list, because DHCD is, for example, and I think DHA should certainly be. Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Mejia, before I go to Councilor Braden, did you have a comment?
No, I'm just curious about process, because I don't know. I know that I was stopped. I wasn't sure if you were done with me. I just want to be clear that are we going to go back to another round, just because I don't feel like I finished, and then I know Councilor Bach went on a little bit longer than me. So I'm just curious about whether or not I'm going to have an opportunity to come back.
We'll certainly come back around. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden?
Thank you. Just a little more about the importance of childcare and access to quality childcare. And it's all the intersectionality of all the different issues, like access to job training and efforts to raise up the economic stability of the families as well, so that they can be able to become more self-sustaining. And I know there's a huge level of need in terms of childcare. And the other issue I had was with regard to parents, and not only children with disabilities, but perhaps a parent with a disability. Is there some thought being given into that particular scenario? Thank you.
Who'd like to take that?
Well, I can speak only to the childcare, but I wasn't sure what the specific question was. I can tell you that right now in the state of Massachusetts, there are 9,000 children on the wait list for vouchers. Now, there are children, obviously, some of those children are perfectly housed. They just are poor, but it is a complex multi-step process for a family to, one, find a seat in a child care center if they are homeless. Frankly, if they're any person, it's complex, but for the homeless, it's more complex because you have to find a place that has a child care, either a homeless contract, which those contracts have not been bid out in the last, I think we're on the 9th year of a 3-year bid. I think that's correct. And so those contracts are now misaligned with the need. So that is a process that keeps contracts from being available where they are most needed in many cases. Vouchers, you have, income eligible vouchers that children can get or families can get. They are good because they travel with the child no matter where they are educated. But again, it's a multi-step process. And oftentimes it's very complicated for the family to understand how that process actually works and to go to the multiple visits that they have to make to get a voucher from a CCR&R. And so the whole thing just, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes focus, and it's hard. And so it keeps a lot of families from getting their children into early education, and without a safe place to put a child, it's very hard to get your economic house in order and, fix the problem of instability. I hope that answered some of your question.
That did indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
The childcare, we had a hearing a few weeks ago about the importance of good childcare for everyone, really. But we do have a crisis in that area.
Yes.
And it's particularly acute for folks who are unhoused or in unstable housing situations. The question really about the disability was, I've had some experience working with a family who the mother had a disability, and it was really, really difficult to find not only housing that was adequate for the family, but the disability of the parent added an extra layer of difficulty to the whole situation. And I always feel that as a physical therapist with that background myself, I feel, to raise up the issue of disability is important. It may be a smaller subset, but it is a very critical one, and it's very difficult to find housing that's accessible.
I'm sure others have data on this, but we know that those families either are sometimes experiencing periods of homelessness that are 2 or 3 times longer because it is so hard to find proper housing. I'm sure Larry and Danielle, you have other data points that you can share.
Yeah. Councilor Braden, thank you so much for your question. Just to add to Kate's notes, she's correct. So in our particular agency, and certainly I imagine we're more than 1/5 of the shelter, we serve 1/5 of the shelter population in the city, our agency alone, and 40% of our parents have self-disclosed chronic health conditions. And then an additional 20% have other mental health, physical or developmental disabilities. So that makes a fairly large population of individuals. And Kate is correct. Those families with underlying conditions, mental, physical, or behavioral, the length of time in shelter is exponentially longer because it's fewer opportunities for both shelters. So as Felicia Smith had mentioned, very few accessible homeless shelter units. We have some, Felicia's got a lot. And then actual housing itself, plus access to services. Our families are very transient. They get bounced around. They're hard to catch up. So when we apply for services, their original address may not be their current address. So we have both a housing issue and we have a service issue because of the nature of families' homelessness and the fact that they're often invisible to systems that have a hard time finding them.
Thank you for your answer. As a housing advocate over many years, and we built a huge amount of housing in Alston, Brighton, but one thing I think in terms, it's really important to have developers at the table because both private developers and nonprofit developers. I feel that, especially out here, the focus is very much on building small units of housing, like studios and 1 bedrooms, and it's not set up to build an infrastructure of housing that supports families. We're just not building housing for families in an economy that's focused on young professionals who are single or in smaller family groups than regular families. So it's a big problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Breeden. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you so much, Madam. Whatever, is it Vice Chair? What, like, it's not even Vice Chair. But just one question. So my experience in trying to help people who are struggling with homelessness involve largely trying to connect them to agencies. As we create this, this roundtable with goals towards finding, holes in servicing these needs, I'm aware that, providers will be at the table and some elected officials, and hopefully there will be space for folks who are actually have been had unstable housing or are currently dealing with that situation. But one of the gaps that I think would be good to hear, and it may already be happening in terms of the conversations, is there's certain agencies that I'm sure more often than others are seeking out providers. I would put CPCS and the Committee for Public Counsel Services on that list of people who are usually seeking the services for their clients or for people who come into contact with their organizations. And so is there a space included here or a way to receive input from them about where they believe that the access to those services can be made easier or more clear or more streamlined?
I'll answer that, and if anyone wants to add to it, we haven't approached them as an organization to ask about some of those gaps in services, so I think that's a fantastic suggestion, and we will do that. And to your first question, there are 3 seats at the table for individuals with lived expertise, lived experience. And one of the shifts that we've suggested, I think it came maybe from Courtney or Dominique or Chief Dillon, to make sure that we are compensating any individual who has lived expertise, a family who's experiencing homelessness or currently unhoused, that we are compensating them for their time. But I'll look into the CPCS piece as well. I think that's a great suggestion. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would just also, I'm not a provider for these services. And so I think that the organizations that do provide these services probably know where they get most of their referrals or clients from, whether it's, from specific organizations or not. And it would be interesting to me, even if they don't have necessarily a seat there, if they're part of some of these sessions, that they're allowed to come in and just say, hey, when I go through the process, this is where I tend to run into walls, or this is where my clients tend to, feel unable to get through the bureaucracy. And I think that would just be a good point of trying to make these things accessible to the folks. So it's that more so than just CPCS, but in general. And that's it. Thank you so much all for the work you do. It's vital.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that they can lend some important advice. And I'll say this to the members of the roundtable that are here today, that they should probably take a look at our list of items that sort of need to happen by government level, but then also by timeline, because there may be some gaps that we missed in our conversations, and that could really educate us to some of those missing pieces. Thank you very much, Councilor Arroyo. I do want to ask Danielle one quick question about the Aspen Institute model. You had used some of that in the presentation. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that, and then to colleagues, we'll do a brief second round of questions.
Sure. So, there's many different ways to think about how humans function in the world. And the Aspen Institute basically breaks it down into domains. And when it comes to the background of this model, I would actually have to defer to Mr. Siemens on that. He spent much more time looking at it intensely than I have. But as a group, what we talked about was, how did we look at the different areas that we all need to access? Every one of us, all of our families in shelter or homeless and not in shelter. And for me, it's always thinking about, where do the services lie and how do folks access those services? And so what we liked about the visual of the Aspen Institute was that it structured domains. And that if you stopped and said, okay, to access the services I would need for this domain, where do I go? And when you started to kind of tag those domains to different state agencies, you started to see that you end up with a very large number of agencies, right? So Kate talks about childcare, and that's EEC, elementary and early education, right? If we want child services for home-based therapy, that's under Mass Health as a subset called CBHI, right? So you need mental health services. There's some that sit at the Department of Mental Health. What you see is that when government funds things, you guys know better than I do, serving in those roles, right? You have to figure out how you deliver the money in a way that gets to the services. And what happens naturally is a fragmentation of how those services get sliced, and then you determine eligibility based on limited resources. So what we tried to show there was that if we wanted families to have access to different parts of their life, right, and how they function, whether it's food, mental health, domestic violence, right? How did you start to think about who had control of those services and resources, and how did you pull them together? And the special commission will look at that, right? That's what they will be tasked to do, is say, how do we try to coordinate? Where are the barriers when folks are trying to access across different services, across different entities?
Thank you. Anything to add to that? Great, thank you very much, Danielle, for sharing that. Councillor Flynn is no longer with us. I know Chief Dillon did have to leave, so she did a quiet goodbye. Councillor Mejia.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, Councillor Edwards is no longer part of the conversation. I don't see her here. No?
She's still here, but she's in and out. She's got some technical difficulties.
Oh, okay, okay. So I'm just curious, I'm really excited about all of this, and just curious in terms of the frequency of like the information that's going to be shared and rolled out. Will there be like a dashboard or some way for people to keep informed about the work that's happening? I think that would be a really great attribute to this project. If it doesn't exist, then it'd be great to have or consider. I just think that information, everyone's hungry for information these days. And so the more access we have to what you're learning and what you're finding, and if it could be, you know, something that you can share out on a quarterly basis on a sort of dashboard, that would be helpful to those who are doing this work. And then I also think about a lot of nonprofit organizations who are smaller, a little more the mom and pop type of shops in terms of kind of like the roles and responsive, you know, role that they can play in having a seat at the table. One thing is looking at nonprofits, and then also thinking about those who are usually, you know, doing the work but just don't have a seat at the table. Just curious about kind of like that recruitment and how we can make sure that we're looking across the entire city for folks to be engaged in the process. And then I'm also just curious about, this is more about, you know, the development that's happening in the city of Boston. And I think Councilor Breeden was really dead on in terms of like making sure that developers are also part of this, or at least engaged in the conversation, because a lot of the things that we're talking about begin and end with whether or not we have enough affordable housing in the city of Boston. It begins and ends with the number of affordable units that exist in the city of Boston. So we can't talk about ending homelessness, family homelessness, if we're not really looking at the way we're building in Boston. And so I'm just curious what role, if any, we're looking at developers in particular playing in this commission. And then the last question that I had is to someone's point earlier in terms of like, it's only here for 5 years. Just curious about how we're gonna end family homelessness, considering that Boston is one of the 3rd highest in terms of gentrified cities in 5 years.
Those are all fantastic and excellent questions. I'll just point you to the ordinance around some of the reporting out. There isn't a specific reference to the dashboard, but there is mandated quarterly meetings as well as additional subcommittee meetings as determined by the commission, especially specific to certain topic areas, as well as a biannual report to the clerk and then presentation before the city council regularly, as a number of our commissions do currently. I think that the addition or the link to the dashboard may be an interesting way to also share some of this information. The question around the 5-year piece is one that we discussed in great detail. We want to make sure that this work can continue longer than that, but that we work towards something that will happen both the initial meeting within 60 days, then the initial work within the first 12 months, but then recognizing that if we don't have an end date in mind, that the work will just go on and sometimes it'll meander mindlessly. When we set hard deadlines can always be extended, but if we're not working towards within a specific time frame, the work will sometimes get extended. So for me, it was really important that we had some concrete timelines in place to work towards. If we don't set goals, if we don't write them down, if we aren't measuring them, they're not going to happen, or they're going to happen a little bit slower than they should. And part of the extended work that we've done as a roundtable is outline some items that we think could happen within a 6-month time frame, 12 month, etc., because it's so important that we are sort of calculating and counting and measuring and working towards some sort of end result. The developer question is a really interesting one, because we as a roundtable, as we brainstormed and talked about different partners to have at the table, one that had not been at the table but was on our queue and then COVID hit, was both private developers and nonprofit developers. How could we and how could the providers be connected to and networked with the Mass CDC Alliance so that they could do some work with nonprofit developers? How could they also be partnered with some of the larger scale developers? And we had conversations, including the BPDA, around the need to make sure that affordable units included family-sized affordable units. And then your questions around smaller nonprofits. Felicia's here from the Sojourner House, which is one of those smaller family shelters. We also have, as part of the roundtable series, St. Ambrose Church, which is a small family shelter. You're very familiar with Project Hope, which provides lots of services, but is a smaller scale when it's for the family shelter piece. Our roundtable list is comprehensive. We're continuing always to build on it. We had that statewide meeting the other day in which we discovered a few more shelter providers that work with Boston families that haven't been at the table, that we're always looking to add and build on it. The roundtable is actually a fairly large group of providers. Here today, you just see a sampling of some of the different types. I'm not sure, I think I've answered most of your questions. I'm not sure if any of the panelists have something to add, to my responses.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. And then I just want, for the record, to note that a lot of the advocacy that my office did on behalf of some of the budget items, whether or not we voted yes for it, a lot of the advocacy that we did for language access and outreach and supporting Sheila Dillon's department was because of how loud we were in every single public hearing about making sure that we're pouring resources into what is going to help uplift and get our people out of poverty and to stay out of poverty and to stay housed. And so I just want to say for the record that while I may have not voted in favor of the budget, a lot of the advocacy during the 56,000 public hearings that I participated in during the budget session was to help support our most vulnerable residents in the city of Boston, including a lot of the efforts that come out of Sheila's department. So I just want to just state that for the record, that I'm all day, every day about those who are living these realities. And so really here for all of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach.
Madam Chair, thanks so much. I think I've asked all of my questions. Looking forward to the working sessions and digging into some of the more legislative details. But again, just want to appreciate you and all the panelists this evening and say that I unfortunately have to go to a 6 o'clock, so I won't be here for the duration. Thank you.
That's quite fine. Thank you, Councilor Bach. And during this hearing, I received a text message when Director McGonigal and Bill was at that hearing. There's a picture of you in the group because we do like to take photos of our roundtables. So thank you for that continued support. Councilor Braden, do you have an additional question?
No, I'm really excited about continuing this process. It's congratulations on this initiative, and I want to be involved in any way I can to support the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Breeden. And I will say that your attention to this idea around creating more additional family-sized affordable housing really is key to so much of this work, because it's a huge deficit when we think about the needs of our families across our city. So thank you. Councilor Arroyo has left. So I've also said a lot, and I wonder if, if any of the panelists, anyone here have anything additional to add before we wrap up today's hearing. I want to just, extend again I'm just incredibly grateful for just the work that you do every day for the families here in the city of Boston, whether you do it for an organization or for the city. I'm just so happy to know all of you and to be able to do this work alongside of you. There was a tweet the other day, I think Danielle, your organization, said a thank you tweet to me for some of my work. And I say, I feel grateful to get to do this work. I don't want to do this work. I want to end family homelessness, and I want to focus on other things. But until that day, I am very just lucky to be able to do this work every single day with all of you, because your passion certainly continues to light my flame, because this work can get tiring, and I can pick and choose the times of day that I want to focus on this. This is your bread and butter. This is what you do every single day to work with our families and their children, and to support them through what is some of the most difficult hours and weeks and days and months and years of their lives. So I'm just forever grateful to be able to sample your passion and to be a part of this work, and the way that all of you have let me be a part of this work. I look forward to what Councilor Edwards referred to as our working session, to work on any of these text amendments, to see how we can incorporate some of the suggestions that came up in today's hearing, as well as the compensatory option. I am curious if central staff can tell me if we have any public testimony. I don't believe we have any.
Counselor, no, I didn't receive anything else other than the panelists.
So thank you, Christine, for that, and central staff for making today happen. I also want to thank Chief Dillon. I know she had to leave for another commitment, but I'm grateful for her leadership. And of course, Mayor Walsh for his leadership, and certainly support, especially around staffing this commission with a family advisor, an advisor on family homelessness. We all know, those of us that feel passionate about this work, that if we don't name it and if we don't fund it, it's really hard to do it. It just becomes simple conversations around a table. But to see this work head into this sort of new iteration and this new life is really exciting for me. And happy to scream it from the rooftops, or at least through social media for the time being. But without further ado, I will adjourn Councilor Chair Edwards' hearing today on docket number, I forget the docket number, but it's docket number
0225.
0225. Thank you, Christine. This is an ordinance to create a special commission on ending family homelessness. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll talk very soon.